Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. President Lee Jae-myung is on a state visit to China and is set to hold a summit with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Beijing this afternoon. They're expected to discuss a range of bilateral issues, including North Korea and economic cooperation. South Korea's military said North Korea launched ballistic missiles toward the East Sea on Sunday. The North claimed this morning that the launch was a successful test of its hypersonic missiles and that leader Kim Jong-un was in attendance. Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, who was captured during a U.S. military operation, is set to appear before a court in New York on Monday. Addressing questions over the lack of congressional approval for the operation, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended the move, saying it was a law enforcement arrest, not an invasion. We begin this morning with President Lee Jae-myung's state visit to China, where the leaders of Seoul and Beijing are set to sit down for talks this afternoon. The agenda is expected to cover a range of issues with a focus on the economy and North Korea. Our Blue House correspondent Yoon Jang-min reports from Beijing.
President Lee Jae-myung landed in Beijing on Sunday for his four-day state visit. His meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled for Monday, about 2 months after they met in South Korea. High on the agenda is restoring the Seoul-Beijing relationship, which had been frosty under the previous administration. In an interview with China's CCTV ahead of his trip, President Lee noted that while security cooperation with the U.S. was unavoidable, Seoul-Beijing relations should not head towards confrontation. The leaders are also expected to focus on economic cooperation, centered on supply chains, investment, and the digital economy, with a signing event planned for a number of MOUs. Discussions are also expected on jointly tackling transnational online scam crimes.
The leaders will discuss ways to achieve tangible results that can substantially contribute to the lives of the people in both countries.
North Korea is also on the summit agenda, as Seoul asks Beijing to play a constructive role to revive dialogue with Pyongyang.
Both South Korea and China share the common goal of peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia.
Eyes are also on China potentially lifting its unofficial ban on Korean cultural content that began in 2016. Sensitive issues could also be included, such as China's unauthorized steel structures in the West Sea. When it comes to Taiwan issues, President Lee said in an interview ahead of his trip that South Korea will continue to respect the One China policy. Blue House officials say it's unprecedented to have completed South Korea-China reciprocal visits at the top level in just 2 months.
With the summit taking place amid complicated geopolitics, attention is on President Lee's pragmatic diplomacy and balanced approach, and what it means for the region. Yoon Jang-min, Arirang News, Beijing.
And upon arriving in Beijing, President Lee also had dinner with members of the local Korean community on Sunday. In his opening remarks, Lee said restoring relations with Beijing had been his most significant diplomatic achievement since taking office, after ties had faced strains in recent years. The trip marks the fastest reciprocal state visit between the leaders of South Korea and China following Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit to Gyeongju last year. He expressed hope that his visit would serve as a new starting point for further advancing bilateral relations. The president also pledged to improve overseas voting access for South Korean nationals living in China, noting that there are just 10 polling stations nationwide. Meanwhile, the United States captured Venezuela's leader, Nicolas Maduro, and his wife during a raid on Friday night. The Venezuelan leader was flown to New York, where he's set to appear before a court on Monday. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The United States carried out a ground operation in Venezuela on Saturday, resulting in the capture of President Nicolas Maduro and his transport to the U.S. to face federal charges. The operation took place following heightened pressure from Washington after U.S. President Donald Trump declared a renewed war on drugs. According to U.S. officials, Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, were captured in a middle-of-the-night raid and transported aboard a U.S. warship. They arrived in New York on Saturday evening and are currently being held at the Metropolitan Detention Center. U.S. prosecutors have charged the couple with narco-terrorism conspiracy, alleging involvement in large-scale drug trafficking and cooperation with criminal gangs designated by Washington as terrorist organizations. Maduro has denied all accusations. A spokesperson for the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York said both defendants are scheduled to appear in federal court at noon on Monday. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended the operation on Sunday, saying congressional authorization was not required. Speaking on ABC News, Rubio described the mission as a law enforcement action rather than a military invasion.
It wasn't necessary because this was not an invasion. We didn't occupy a country. This was an arrest operation. This was a law enforcement operation. He was arrested on the ground in Venezuela by FBI agents, read his rights, and removed from the country.
Meanwhile, Venezuela's Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino said a significant portion of Maduro's security team was killed during the raid, though he did not provide casualty figures. He announced that Vice President Delcy Rodriguez has been declared interim president and that the armed forces have been mobilized nationwide to maintain sovereignty. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The dramatic U.S. military operation that led to the capture of Venezuela's president sends shockwaves far beyond the South American country. Meanwhile, with President Lee Jae-myung set to hold a summit with President Xi Jinping this afternoon, eyes are now on what the two leaders will discuss at the meeting. For more on this, we're joined today by Matthew David Jenkins, Associate Professor at the Department of Political Science at Gyeongsang National University. Professor Jenkins, thanks for joining us this morning.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, U.S. President Donald Trump says the United States will run Venezuela for the time being following a military operation that captured Nicolas Maduro. What's behind this operation and what would U.S. leadership in Venezuela mean for the broader geopolitical landscape?
Yeah, sure. So the official U.S. position is that this is due to the trafficking of illegal drugs, specifically fentanyl, which has wreaked havoc in the United States domestically. And so that is the official reason. Venezuela is unable or unwilling to prevent the outflow, the smuggling of narcotics into the United States. And so therefore, he has to be removed from power so that drug trafficking can be properly policed. That's the official reasoning. I think that probably what's going on here is it's more about retaining or regaining rather regional hegemony, regional stability in Latin America. The United States has had a long policy of considering Latin America, both Americas, North and South America, its sphere of influence, right? And I think that this is a part of Trump's America First strategy of regaining that influence and reaffirming it as China and Russia start to creep in and try to get a foothold into Latin America. And that's certainly something that the United States does not want to happen. And we see that Venezuela is one of the leading countries in the pack of countries that were actively opposed to the U.S., who have leftist governments, countries like Cuba, countries like Nicaragua. And they were increasingly trading with China and accepting weapons from China and selling oil to China. And so that's another reason that U.S. probably wants to regain its control over here. In terms of the broader significance, so I would really have to wait to see how the other Latin American countries react. I would, of course, they're all going to say it's a violation of international law, a violation of sovereignty. Sovereignty is the right of a country to rule its own territory. That's a fundamental principle of the international system. So on the one hand, it's a big deal in that sense. So we'll see how they react. On the other hand, it's not the first time it's happened. The United States did the same thing in Panama to Manuel Noriega, who was the president then. and they plucked him out and did the same essential thing. So there's actually a long history of this in Latin America. So I'm not totally certain that it's gonna like be totally groundbreaking in that sense. But I wonder though if it's a signal to the North Koreas of the world, right? That this is U.S. inter isolationism, under Trump is totally gone, right? America first was meaning that America would focus on domestic priorities. Now it seems like that might not necessarily be the case, and so I wonder if this is making, yeah, the North Koreans of the world pretty nervous and like reaffirming their sense of their lack of security in an era where the U.S. is not afraid to use its power blatantly in a violation of international law anymore. So we'll see how that reacts. That sort of echoes across the region.
Right, and like you mentioned, Trump said the U.S. will tap Venezuela's oil reserves to sell to other countries. Why is he so interested in the country's oil, and could this further, inflame tensions with China?
Yeah, the Venezuela has one of the world's largest reserves of petroleum of oil, and so I think the oil it's not necessarily about control of the oil for the U.S. purposes of boosting its domestic economy. I think it's more about the fact that Venezuela is kind of like a failed state, essentially. Not quite that severe, but that's one of the largest sources of migrants, refugees is from Venezuela, right, to the United States, and that's a big domestic issue for the U.S. And so, part of controlling immigration is not just the domestic enforcement, but also making sure that there's regional stability in South America as well, right? Because that's where they're coming from. And so, I think the idea is that they're going to rebuild and restructure Venezuela's oil industry so that it's well functioning and it's fully integrated into the international economy. That will create a lot of investment opportunities for U.S. firms to come and rebuild their infrastructure, which is probably, it's been mismanaged and it's probably not in great shape. And so that'll create investment opportunities, but also allow the U.S. to get a little bit more leverage over the global supply of oil, vis-a-vis other countries, the Middle East, or vis-a-vis Russia, which also has a large share of oil and gas reserves. And so I think it's not necessarily about capturing the oil so much as about repurposing, rebuilding the regional infrastructure, rebuilding regional security, stability, and gaining control over the global oil supply.
I see. And while that's happening, President Lee Jae-myung is set to hold a summit with President Xi this afternoon. How should South Korea balance its relations with Washington and Beijing in 2026?
Yeah, so I mean, I would expect this to be really focused on economics and very practical things. I wouldn't expect a lot of security things to make the agenda, especially given that Korea's major, military ally just captured the leader of another country. It's kind of a bad timing for like major security talks. So I would expect to see it focused on supply chains and maybe lifting the ban on Korean cultural content. That seems to be in the air. I think that's a win-win for both countries, and so I would expect to see it very practical, and I would expect President Yi to play it very safe in terms of its approach with the Beijing. And at the same time, of course, it's not going to abandon the United States. I would expect it to make general pushes for peace, on the Korean Peninsula, peace in the East Asia region, economic cooperation. And I think that everything connects to that. So it would only mention security issues insofar as it connects to economic cooperation. And at the same time, recognizing the reality that Korea's major partner is the United States, and that's just a fact of the matter. And general reaffirming of that alliance, I think, is important too.
I see. You did just say that it's not the right timing for major security talks, but China does play a key role in bringing North Korea back to dialogue. How do you expect this discussion to play out today?
Yeah, it certainly is true. It is the most influential, probably, partner, I would say, for North Korea, the partner most able to put pressure on North Korea But again, as I just said, like the reason why North Korea has nuclear weapons is precisely because if it doesn't, probably things that happen, that the thing that just happened to Venezuela would probably also happen to North Korea. And so it kind of it makes it a little hypocritical to be pushing for denuclearization, for example. I think that it would be more just about a general, look, in order to have economic cooperation, in order to have a good economy, we need peace, right? And so I would expect the talks to be very general in that. Maybe trying to open some more higher level discussions, maybe for fostering, excuse me, economic cooperation with North Korea and things like the Kaesong industrial complex that's been gone for a long time, but or maybe even lower level exchanges like that rather than like security focused things. So that would be my expectation for the talks this time.
I see. All right, Professor Jenkins, thank you so much for your insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
North Korea has fired hypersonic missiles into the East Sea with regime leader Kim Jong-un overseeing the exercise. Now, this marks Pyongyang's first missile launch this year amid heightened global tensions and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's trip to Beijing. Our Park Jun-an has the latest.
North Korea on Sunday fired hypersonic missiles toward the East Sea, with its leader Kim Jong-un personally overseeing the exercise. This was confirmed by South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff and North Korea's state-run Korean Central News Agency. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said multiple missiles fired from near Pyongyang at around 7:50 a.m. Sunday were detected. The projectiles traveled approximately 900 to 950 kilometers before falling into the East Sea between Russia and Japan, with Japan's Ministry of Defense reporting 2 ballistic missiles. The U.S. Indo-Pacific Command also acknowledged the launch, saying it posed no immediate threat to U.S. personal territory or allies, while reaffirming Washington's commitment to defending the homeland and regional partners. Korean Central News Agency on Monday described the event as a hypersonic missile launch training exercise aimed at evaluating the readiness of its hypersonic weapon systems and verifying operational capabilities. Kim Jong-un, who attended the launch, praised the exercise, saying that the readiness and lethality of Pyongyang's strategic offensive capabilities are an effective means of deterrence. The timing of the North's missile launches coincides with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung's departure for China and follows the capture of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro by the U.S. Experts suggest the timing was carefully calculated to reflect Pyongyang's claim that, unlike Venezuela, it possesses nuclear and missile capabilities strong enough to deter potential U.S. intervention. Sunday's missile launch marks North Korea's first ballistic missile launch since November last year. This is also the third since the start of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
And China has sharply increased the enforcement of export controls as the U.S.-China trade war escalates. According to data released by the Korean Security Agency of Trade and Industry on Monday, administrative penalties related to export control violations in China jumped more than 70% in the first half of 2025, with 79 cases recorded, up from 46 the year before. Beijing has expanded controls on strategic minerals, recently adding silver to export licensing requirements, and has tightened rare earth export restrictions on the U.S. Plans to require licenses for products containing Chinese rare earth minerals were postponed for 1 year following last October's U.S.-China Leaders Summit in Gyeongju, easing immediate global supply chain concerns. And on the cultural front, after a blockbuster year for K-pop last year, 2026 is shaping up to be another exciting comeback season, with the return of big names like BTS and BLACKPINK. Our Park Won-woo has this report.
K-pop fans, get ready. Phenomenal boy band BTS has officially announced a March 20th comeback, revealed on the very first day of the new year.
여러분 새해 복 많이 받으시고요. 올해 뵙겠습니다.
The release will mark BTS's first album in nearly 4 years, following the completion of military service by all 7 members. Details on the album's concept or a potential world tour are expected later this year. Expectations are already running high as their 2022 track Run BTS from their latest album topped the iTunes chart in more than 60 countries. But BTS isn't the only act making waves. BLACKPINK's dropping a first full-length album in 4 years, following last summer's single Jump. BIGBANG's also gearing up for a comeback, marking 20 years since debuting, while EXO is set to drop a new full-length album in mid-January. As these so-called second and third generation K-pop groups return, questions remain over whether they can recapture the spotlight they once held. One expert said fan power will be the key.
The fandom has become much stronger than before, so even when groups make a comeback after a long break, the role of their fans is clearly important. What matters most is whether artists show what their fans want to see as K-pop. More than other genres, is fan-centered. So, it's better not to be overly innovative or focus on agency profits.
He added that collaborations could help veteran groups reach a second peak, citing TWICE participating in the K-pop Demon Hunters project as a successful example. He also noted that working with younger generation artists could help sustain and expand their musical careers. While some analysis show a global decline in K-pop album sales compared to 2024, the same expert says it's not a major concern.
Album sales aren't the only metric to look at. The decline was partly due to major groups postponing their comebacks. Globally, overall consumption is shrinking. It's not just happening in Korea. At the same time, concert sales have reached record highs, and I believe this positive trend will continue into next year.
Although groups like BTS and BLACKPINK still lead the global K-pop scene, he said it's time for that leadership to be passed on, with more active participation from rookies and artists from small to mid-sized agencies. 박건우, Arirang News.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on Saturday signaled a tougher crackdown as a week of protests over the country's ailing economy shook Iran. In his remarks, he drew a line between protesters angry over the Riya's collapse and what he called rioters, saying they must be put in their place. Human rights activists say at least 15 people have been killed and more than 580 protesters are currently behind bars. U.S. President Donald Trump warned Iran on Friday that if it violently kills peaceful protesters, the United States, quote, will come to their rescue, prompting Iranian officials to threaten U.S. troops in the region. An armed gang in northern Nigeria has slaughtered at least 30 people and abducted dozens more after attacking a crowded village market. Gunmen on motorcycles descended on Kasuwa Daji village in Niger State on Saturday evening, opening fire indiscriminately on shoppers and traders. The attackers razed to the ground several homes and the market during a 3-hour rampage before retreating into the forest. Local Catholic Church officials warn the actual death toll likely exceeds 40, with many children among the missing. In Syria, the UK and France have carried out a joint strike on a major Islamic State underground weapons cache. Royal Air Force Typhoons and French aircraft launched precision airstrikes on Saturday night, targeting a network of tunnels in the mountain north of Palmyra. Intelligence confirmed that the facility stored high-grade explosives intended for a jihadist resurgence. IS reportedly has around 7,000 fighters remaining in the region. UK Defense Secretary John Healey said the strikes eliminated the threat without civilian casualties, asserting that the coalition will not allow the terror group to rebuild its violent caliphate. In Las Vegas, CES 2026 kicks off this Tuesday, January 6th, showcasing the next generation of intelligent machines. Organizers of the Consumer Electronics Show expect more than 4,500 exhibitors, including 1,400 startups, and the show is set to showcase artificial intelligence across consumer tech alongside a heavy focus on robotics and humanoid robots. Major brands slated to appear include NVIDIA, AMD, Lenovo, Hyundai, and Samsung. Las Vegas tourism officials said CES brings roughly 140,000 visitors and about $380 million in economic impact, with airlines adding 360 flights for the event.
I'm sure many are coming back to work after a long end-of-year holiday break, but there's no severe cold to worry about, despite today marking Sohan, one of the coldest days of winter on the seasonal calendar. However, this afternoon will be colder than Sunday, with temperatures hovering right around the seasonal norms. And from this afternoon, skies will gradually clear nationwide, but the air will become even drier. Dry weather alerts are already issued in parts of Seoul and much of the eastern regions, with a dry weather warning along the east coast. So please, small spark could lead to a large fire. Extra caution is essential. This afternoon, Seoul will be getting up to 2 degrees. Gwangju, Daegu both topping out at 6 degrees Celsius under bright skies nationwide with decent air quality. Now, those in Jeju will have frequent winter mix this week. And after that, between Friday and Saturday, the central regions will be seeing another round of winter rain or snowfall.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.